Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Every Star Wars fan is familiar with the concept of the Force. It's the energy field that is inside of every living being in the galaxy, and it's the energy manipulated by the Jedi and Sith that allows them to do amazing things. But the Sith and the Jedi are actually just one of many different groups who have made a connection with the Force. But throughout galactic history, there have been many other species, organizations, and factions that have discovered the Force for themselves. They've studied the Force and utilized it for their own purposes. Today, I want to take a look at some of these alternative views of the Force and see how their views are different from the mainline Sith and Jedi. The Chiss were an interesting race. Aside from their red eyes and blue skin, they were nearly identical to human beings. But long ago, these near humans developed their own colony in the unknown region of the galaxy. The high density of gravitational anomalies in this region made it difficult for the Chiss to keep a connection with the wider galaxy, which allowed these people to develop their own unique culture and technology insulated from the wider galaxy. Now, one of the more interesting side effects of the development of their parallel civilization from the rest of the galaxy is the Chiss discovered the Force in their own very unique way. You see, the Chiss called the Force the Sight, and the Sight was an extremely rare power amongst the Chiss. It was even more rare than the Force is for other species. So for a Chiss to have the Sight, as it's called, they almost always are female, and they only really have this power when they're very young. The second they get a bit older, around teenage years, they get less control over the Force, and when they become adults, they basically revert to having no connection with the Sight at all. Now, the Chiss Sight is relatively weak compared to other types of connections to the Force. The Chiss basically had two main powers that they could use when they had the Sight. One was called the third sight, and that's precognition. The other one was called the second sight, which is telepathy. Actually, the second sight was incredibly rare. Most Chiss who had the Sight only had the ability to use precognition. Now, because the Chiss lived in an area where hyperspace lanes were constantly shifting due to the large amount of gravitational anomalies that could be found in the unknown region, young Chiss girls with the third sight were highly sought after by the Chiss military, and that is because they were secretly used as navigators for their ships. Using their precognition abilities, these Chiss navigators actually piloted the ships directly and made sure they avoided black holes and other dangerous obstacles while traveling at FTL speeds. This is actually one of the best kept Chiss military secrets, and they actually ran operations to hide the fact that they had their own Force users. A lot of times, Chiss naval ships on less important missions would actually use third-party or different species Force sensitives to navigate. This was in order to plant this idea amongst the various groups living in the unknown region that the Chiss then have their own Force sensitives. And believe it or not, these individuals, these young girls who served in the military as navigators, who had the Sight, they were actually called Skywalkers, which I think is kind of interesting. And these Skywalkers were amongst the most important assets that the Chiss military had. The Jedi and Sith have only existed as long as the Republic has. That's thousands and perhaps a few 10,000 years, according to legends. The canon still seems a little bit unsure of the exact dates, but the Force has existed long before the Republic ever became a thing, and prior to the Republic, you had many other different factions, including a faction known as the Siphonians, who were immensely powerful in their utilization of the Force. They emerged from their planet of Zepho in the pre-Republic era and became one of the most dominant powers in the galaxy. They even spread their territory to a neighboring galaxy on the world of Peridia. Unlike the Chiss, it was actually very common for a Siphonian to be connected to the Force, which they like to call the life wind. The Siphonians would be guided by powerful sages, and just like the Jedi, these sages were not above corruption. Towards the end of Siphonian civilization, a great civil war was fought between the Siphonian leaders, who had fallen to the dark side, and a rebel opposition group. The Siphonians would disappear into the unknown region shortly after that conflict, leaving behind many ruins spread across the galaxy. As we begin to move beyond the traditional Jedi and Sith view of the Force, we'll begin to see that the Force does work in many mysterious ways. Before the Clone Wars began, Grand Master Yoda traveled to the Vagadar system and encountered a planet that called to him through the Force. The planet was surrounded by a treacherous asteroid field that made it incredibly difficult for pilots to reach the surface. Of course, it was no challenge for Yoda to navigate through. What was a challenge, though, was the two groups of natives Yoda found on the planet. Most of them were children, and they were all equipped with strange blue stones, which they fashioned into spear tips and weapons. And these two groups were trying to kill each other. Now, the children would use an ability known as stone power to telekinetically move these blue stones around like projectiles. And Yoda, being the curious individual he was, would learn how to utilize the stone power from one of the locals. Eventually, it was revealed that this blue stone actually came from the body of a gigantic blue titan that was heavily connected to the Force. It was ultimately the flesh and body that these children were using for their weapons. That's some pretty crazy stuff. So yeah, the Force can manifest itself inside of some crazy blue rock, and also in a magical ichor, which is another form of the Force that can be found on the planet of Dathomir, home to the Night Sisters and Night Brothers. The Night Sisters wielded this luminescent green mist and used it to power their Dathomiri magic. This allowed shamans like Mother Talzin to reinforce the strength and size of individuals like Savage Opress. We've seen Mother Talzin build legs out of the magical ichor for Maul after he was cut in half. We've also seen the spirit ichor turn Dathomiri Night Sisters invisible to the naked eye and bring scores of dead Night Sisters back to life in an undead army. Now, in Legends, it was actually said that the spirit ichor only existed on the planet of Dathomir, and that when a Night Sister left the planet, she lost her abilities to tap into the powerful energy source. But as we see in the new canon during the Ahsoka series, Morgan Elsbeth used this spirit ichor far away from Dathomir, and the Great Mothers of Peridea were also able to tap into this energy source far away from Dathomir. And so it seems like this ichor can now also be accessed almost anywhere in the galaxy. And this makes the Night Sisters far more formidable than they were in Legends. Kreia is quite an interesting figure in Star Wars history. She actually started her life out as a Jedi historian and later turned to the dark side and became Darth Traya of the Sith Triumvirate. Kreia was an outside-the-box thinker. Instead of worshipping the Force like most Jedi, instead of trying to dominate it like most Sith, Kreia believed that the Force had enslaved all living beings in the galaxy, which is why she labeled the energy as the insidious Force. Her understanding of galactic history and her own partaking in galactic history made her understand that the conflict caused by the light and dark side of the Force has caused endless suffering for the galaxy, and there seems to be very little effort by the cosmic or living Force to prevent further tragedy. And so she came to the conclusion that if the Force was in fact sentient, then it was a brutal and uncaring God, one that needed to be destroyed. You know, plenty of other Force users have come close to having this opinion that Darth Traya had. Luke in Legends, after defeating the dark side entity known as Abeloth, also shared a similar view on how dangerous the Force could be. Although his solution to the damage that the insidious Force caused the galaxy was fighting for balance in the Force and maintaining it at all costs. The Yangtze were a strange species of aliens, and like most groups who created their own Force beliefs, they lived in a very dangerous and isolated part of the galaxy known as the Cathal Rift. This isolation kind of allowed them to develop their own views and thoughts of the Force. Instead of seeing the Force as just dark side and light side or black and white, the Yangtze saw the Force as a rainbow, as in it had multiple spectrums and meanings. Just like the Jedi, the Yangtze respected the Force and believed that it should not be meddled with. They went a little bit further and they would refuse to utilize the Force as a tool in most cases. Sometimes they would use the Force to power their ships, which was actually incredibly hard to do. Not even the Jedi and Sith really knew how to do this. Now, unlike the Jedi, the Yangtze believed that the Force powers were a gift given to them by their deities. And so these Yangtze monks would spend their entire life performing errands and pilgrimages for their gods. The Yangtze did have one major enemy, and that was slavery. If they ever encountered slavers in their own system, they would start attacking without any warning. They wanted to wipe it off the face of the galaxy. The NT had developed a semi-organic technology for their space travel, and they would use the Force to move their ships, something that not even the Jedi and Sith were able to do. But believe it or not, there was another faction that was able to do this. You see, before the Republic was established, there was an empire known as the Rotton Infinite Empire. The Rottons themselves used to be a primitive species before they were visited by a group of enlightened aliens known as the Qua. The Qua traveled around the galaxy, lifting lesser species out of ignorance and poverty. They would bring the gift of technology and teachings of the Force to these species. Unfortunately, the Qua didn't realize that some species and some cultures were naturally backwards and messed up and probably not worth saving. And the Rottons were just that, a vile species that loved war, violence, destruction. They practiced cannibalism. They also happened to be naturally aligned with the dark side of the Force. When the Qua taught the Rottons how to use the Force, they quickly rebelled and used Qua technology to take over a huge portion of the known galaxy, enslaving and pillaging all other species they could find along the way. The interesting thing about the Rotton is that they were able to use the Force to power almost all of their technology, from their communications devices to their ancient hyperdrives. It was actually these Force-powered hyperdrives that would serve as the basis of hyperdrive technology we see during the Republic era. Now, eventually the Rottons would encounter a plague that would actually subdue the Force's connection with the species. Within a generation, the Rottons lost the ability to connect to their technology and use it. And as quickly as they rose to power, the Rottons would fall. The Eternal Empire of Valkorion can technically trace its roots back to one of the most powerful Sith emperors of all time, Vitiate. No, seriously, this guy could have easily given Palpatine a run for his money when it came to manipulation and sheer power. Guarding the Eternal Empire were the feared Knights of Zakul, an order of Force-sensitive warriors who had a very different set of ideologies and philosophy about the Force when compared to the Jedi and Sith. They viewed the Force as the ultimate tool. There were really no restrictions on what a Knight of the Zakul could learn about the Force. And at the same time, it was encouraged that any newly discovered knowledge would be shared amongst the entire group. At the same time, the Knights of Zakul were not afraid of the power of the Force like the Jedi, but at the same time, they believed that the Force should be used to fight for justice, which is kind of more of a Jedi kind of thing to do. And the interesting thing is, all the Knights of Zakul actually drew their power from the Force through Emperor Valkorion personally. In battle, the Knights of Zakul could be identified by their armored suits, along with their shields and Force pikes. A very practical loadout that's perfect for taking on a Force user, either Jedi or Sith. And for a while, the Eternal Empire would prove to be superior to both the Old Republic and the Sith Empire on the battlefield. So there you have it, guys, 8 different interpretations and views of the Force that are completely different from how the Jedi and Sith view things. And as you can see, the Jedi and Sith were not the only game in town, and now that they're both kind of gone, I wonder if they'll be replaced by another one of these ideologies. Anyway, let me know in the comment section below what you guys think, which one of these schools of the Force are your favorite. Are there some different ideologies that I've missed? I know I've missed a few. I know there are a few other ones I wanted to talk about but didn't have time in this video. So yeah, comment below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.